Okay, great. For those of you who just joined, Jeremy's just given a bit of background about the Urban Agriculture Consortium and the Policy Influencer Network groups, the PINGs, of which this is the ninth session that we've run. So thank you all so much for coming. It's a really exciting, huge topic that we can only just begin to unpack in these 2 hours. So here's our agenda. We've had the intro and welcome. I'm going to talk a bit about our Greenbelt project so far. We're going to screen our films that we made last year. And then we'll have some 5-minute kind of perspectives or provocations or shares from people who are directly involved or affected by what's happening in our green belts. We'll invite a kind of Q&A, and we really want to hear from you and your perspectives.
Ellie's in one. I think Paul had Molly.
Let's just mute Louis. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion about how we take things forward. We can share these slides as well afterwards. I'm trying to progress the slide. Okay, so Jeremy's going to put in the chat. We're going to start off with a question that we began when we did our in-person workshop in the Greenbelt last year. What 3 words come to mind when you think about the Greenbelt? So if you could just do a bit of tech, click on the link in the chat, and you should be taken to Mentimeter.
Maddie, I can't do it because you're hosting, so you'll have to put it in.
You're also a co-host, though.
All right, sorry.
Yeah? No, okay. Let's see how we can do it.
It's all right. I think I've got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, take me a second. Hang on.
There's also that QR code there if you can access it on your phone or another way. So there'll be 4 of these questions in the course of the session that we'll come to at different points, but to collect the kind of thoughts and wisdom that are in the room. And that will be part of a document that we will use to shape the work going forward. And we are also in the process of seeking funding to be able to take this forward as well. So this will help to shape the nature of that funding application as well. So can you just give me a sort of thumbs up if you can see the Menti, access the Menti? If you can't, just type responses into the chat. That's our fallback, so that's fine. So when you think about the Greenbelt, what 3 words might you choose? What comes to mind? I'll give you a moment to.
I'll copy that. So where the hell's the sheet? What's the chat got? Doesn't seem to pop up in Zoom anymore.
Oh, I think I've got Graham. I've got your mute, but I can hear you as well. I don't know. Don't quite understand what's about that.
Mic is on. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, if everyone could just make sure they're muted. So I'm going to also just begin by talking about the purposes of today's session. So it's sort of fourfold. To introduce you to UAC's Greenbelt project, originally called Greenbelt 2.0, Rings of Resilience, Resistance and Renewal, and to share our films and our process around that. The second purpose is to hear a range of perspectives or perhaps provocations from people engaged in some way in reimagining the Greenbelt already. The third purpose is to connect, if we can, with all of you. And the fourth is to find opportunities in different Greenbelts in England to deliver more of the processes that we did last year, these facilitated Greenbelt community conversations, sort of creative visioning workshops, and like in the films you'll see. And we want to do that in order to gather diverse voices together to influence policy and change the story and create a different development paradigm for our Greenbelts. So we talk about this as the agroecological Greenbelt. And so here's just a slide to give you a sense of where our Greenbelts in England are. More of this is in the film also. And just about agroecology as a term, what that means. It might not be familiar to everybody. So I've just taken, there are lots of different definitions. I've just taken this one from
Maddie,
the Food Farming and Countryside Commission. That's when we think about landscapes in which we can see regenerative practices, skilled green jobs, countryside for everyone, so accessibility, fresh, healthy and local food, nature recovery, and healthy soils.
We
and there's
can't
very much
see
an
the
implicit...
slide, Maddie.
Sorry?
We can't see the slide, Maddie.
Oh. Okay. I don't know. What can you see?
Still says, what 3 words come to mind? It's still the Mentimeter slide.
Yeah, they don't move, but we can see one slide, always the same.
Oh. Classic. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and then I'll try to do that again. Apologies, everyone. These are always challenging. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks for flagging that up. Just keep telling me if things aren't working. And implicit in agroecology is a piece around justice and fairness, that are the systems that we put in place meet the needs of all and not the needs of the few. So we see a lot of different images and headlines at the moment about the pressures and conflicts and tensions in the Greenbelt space, particularly by opportunistic developers, people wanting their nice slice of rural life, and it's very much couched around developing mass house building in the Greenbelt and changing the boundaries. And it's a very unnuanced and unholistic, often polarizing conversation that we see quite a lot of. So we're trying to get beyond that and bring in a lot more voices, and where the conversation isn't just led by certain individuals or by developer interests. So what brought us here? I just want to flag up a few things. Can you see that slide? What brought us here?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So this is this relates to what we were doing last year. This is a woman called Catherine Withers, and she owns Yew Tree Farm in the Greenbelt south of Bristol. And her case, she's been battling to save her farm from housing developer interests and the expansion of a cemetery into the land that she uses for regenerative grazing by the council. So there's a pincer movement from both the private and the public sector on Bristol's last working farm in the Greenbelt. And so that was the source of much of our inspiration for this work and motivation for this work. Also, you've probably seen coming back to language around destitution and the incredible poverty in this country. We've also worked last year and the year before with the amazing growers, middle ground growers just outside Bath, who have been developing a vision for a regenerative, agroecological, bioregional food system. And we worked quite a bit with them on that. It's an incredible piece of work. And they are also in the Greenbelt. And we're having very, very positive conversations with Bath and North East Somerset Council to take this work forward there. We're also inspired by what happens when people get together in circle, listen to each other, and have proper conversations about these things, bringing up their needs, their experiences, and creating a sense of collective vision and collective wisdom. And we were funded last year through this project of Bristol and Bath Creative R&D called Grounding Technologies. And we'll go to look at the process of that. I'm just going to skip over this slightly, but I will share these slides with you, and I really urge you to read about the vision for We Are Avon, because it's very much informing the kind of world that we too are imagining. So I wonder if we're going to show these films. Can you see the film on the screen?
Yes.
Thank you. And I wonder if Ruben, who is our filmmaker, is also in this call, and animator on this project, that we work together on this project. I wondered if you wanted to do just anything by way of introducing these films, Ruben. Put you on the spot.
Sure, yeah. Ultimately, this film is funded by an R&D project. So we didn't know exactly what we were making at the start, and to kind of accept and grasp that as a concept. It was also to try lots of different creative technologies all at once, and so the end result feels quite multi-textured, and we've got drone footage and illustration and maps and lots of different things in there. So I thought, yeah, best to sort of explain why it's so kind of multi-textured. And we try to keep the whole project kind of as open as possible to hear people's views and not write a script too early. Obviously, it has Maddie's narration as you'll hear, but yeah, it's very much the whole process was about trying to kind of create a space to allow people to step into it and fill it, which we did through a workshop in a barn, which you will see in the film.
Thank you very much. Thanks. And we'll also show afterwards a shorter film about that captures the sort of more behind the scenes making of thing, which is just 3 minutes. And then we're going to come to the next question on the Mentimeter, which is just we want to harness what comes up for you. What have you learned or enjoyed about these films? We'd really love that feedback. So I'm going to play the film and hopefully it will work. If you can give me a thumbs up.
People are talking about the Greenbelt.
Greenbelt. Greenbelt. Greenbelt. Greenbelt. The Greenbelt.
But what is the Greenbelt? In the UK, the phrase Greenbelt was first used in 1875 by the pioneering social reformer Octavia Hill, a co-founder of the National Trust. In London, she saw a stark difference between East and West. She calculated that West London provided 1 acre of green space per 682 residents, while in the East, each acre served 11 times as many people. This prompted her idea of a green belt around the city, to improve access to open spaces for Londoners. It took 69 years for her ideas to come to life as law and policy. The idea of the Greenbelt spread across England. Today, about 13% of England is designated Greenbelt, covering more land than urban areas. Greenbelt policy has 5 stated purposes, which focus mainly on the prevention of development sprawl and encroachment, while encouraging urban regeneration. But what does the Greenbelt mean to people today? In Bristol, an experiment is taking place to find out what a Greenbelt 2.0 could be. In a wooden barn just south of the city, a discussion is taking place with people from across the region. The first thing we notice is that everyone has a different idea where the Greenbelt is, and that it means different things to different people.
Breathing space.
Countryside.
Opportunity. Empty. Open. Closed. Paradox.
Constraining.
Legislation containing sprawl. Nourish.
Nature.
Balance. Are protected with a question mark. It almost feels like it's a secret.
The actual shape of the Bristol Greenbelt is this, wrapping around surrounding towns such as Keynsham and Bath, and pressing up against Clevedon, Portishead, Nailsea, Thornbury, Yate and Trowbridge. Over time, the urban centres and suburbs have come right up to the Greenbelt boundary. Yew Tree Farm is a living example of fiercely contested Greenbelt land. Catherine Withers has farmed here for many decades, but despite years of campaigning, her land and livelihood are under constant threat on many fronts. She farms regeneratively on protected nature conservation land, yet of the leases she had on land neighbouring her own, one has been withdrawn in favour of housing interests. Plus, a planning proposal has been submitted for council crematorium expansion into a field she currently uses for grazing. There were once many working farms in the fringes of the city, feeding the city. This is now the last one in this area, a sign of how much the Greenbelt has changed since the introduction of the policy. Mapping allows us to consider a lot of things, including past, present, and future scenarios. We can use open data to see floodplains and potential future flooding. We can see sites of special scientific interest, agricultural land classifications, or how much land is used for golf courses compared to other leisure activities. Currently, in the Bristol and Bath Greenbelt, golf uses more space than any other sport or hobby. But there are important things that are much harder to map. Mental health, for example, soil quality, housing vulnerability, community resilience, the priorities of the young. Back in the barn, a new imagining of the Greenbelt is taking place.
It would be amazing to see it more diverse. At the moment, when I'm walking around the village, there is not anyone else of colour around. So it would be amazing to see that.
Often there aren't enough footpaths to really give us freedom in the landscape. Within that, I also see like little huts and little buildings that maybe have like communal tools and supplies and stuff to manage the land.
The buildings would need to be made of inherently sustainable materials.
And the farmers will be skilled not only in managing the land sustainably, but also they will be skilled in welcoming people of all ages, all backgrounds, and show them how food is produced.
I'd like to see this field housing another 20 families, and the UK imports 40% of its food. So if we have an awful lot more horticulture, small-scale pigs, small-scale poultry, and goats, we're producing a vast amount more food and have a vast amount of more jobs in the Greenbelt and have a vast amount of more like human life and community and vibes, basically.
We have activity centres dotted around to bring the urbanites out into the country.
If within the centres there were places for rehabilitation, for healing, connecting back to nature,
climate, ecological, and spiritual emergency centres. Yeah. Custodians for and invigorate a whole new culture of connection with land for young people.
We've got the young people we're training and supporting, that they'll be confident come out by themselves in a few years.
It's like, how do we incorporate that into the curriculum, especially to get children from out of inner city schools, so that that's where camps and training go on?
Let's design it consensually by the community, by the custodians for the greater good.
Held as community land trusts.
It's a social justice issue. And then I'd like to see a mass transit system that links round these kind of things.
Oh, well, it loops all around.
Right.
Okay. Wow.
The transport links also support the workers. There's lots of buses, and those goods get transported back into the city.
What's stopping it? Who are we trying to please?
Frequent community-owned vehicles. There's going to be less of the private ownership culture of private cars.
A network of wildlife corridors filled with solutions to climate mitigation.
These vibrant belts of nature and biodiversity coming out like mycelium network, out from the centre all the way out.
On the floor of the barn, sticks and stones are arranged, nudged, rearranged and prodded. People are questioning the harsh divide between green and grey, exploring the unique and critical relationship between the Greenbelt and the urban. The conversation is just getting started. What do you think Greenbelt 2.0 should be? People are talking about the Greenbelt.
Okay. Hang on to the next one.
Greenbelt 2.0 has been a coming together of people with lots of different skill sets to test and challenge the existing concept of the Greenbelt. Particularly today, we've been out in the Greenbelt in this lovely barn surrounded by hay bales and a fire. We've had a great discussion. We've got hands-on and made maps out of stones.
This is about throwing it all up in the air and saying, how might we reimagine what the Greenbelt is for, what it does in a way that meets these multiple needs that we have in this time of climate and ecological emergency, housing emergency, crises.
The Greenbelt is quite a complex topic and quite contentious, and I think there's a lot of blurry lines there. We do need housing, but we also need to protect nature, because without nature we won't exist. We need to ensure that the voice of minority ethnic people are heard in these kind of meetings or consultations, because what happens is usually the loudest voice is heard, and usually BME people are not involved in these kind of consultations. It's not seen as a priority for them, but often they're busy with their day-to-day lives, or they're still doing, I would say, basic equalities work. This is much more strategic, and a lot of people feel that it's not for them.
And I think what I really took away from this was there was lots of different ideas, lots of different ways of imagining the future Greenbelt, and actually having a shared map on the ground to play with and arguably negotiate with was really, really powerful.
The Grounding Technologies funding has just been exactly the right thing at the right time. It's been really interesting, the opportunity that it's brought about to work with people who are working in creative technology. And I think being here today has really grounded this whole process. But what's come out of today is that there's a real excitement and even sort of hunger for and interest in doing more of this, and a real understanding that actually that Venn diagram of community conversations and creative technology, that creates a real sweet spot. And the group that was here today were totally up for that.
From the beginning, we've been thinking about it as something that will challenge people to think about it differently. From people who are planners and have heard of the concept of the Greenbelt and they've decided what it is, challenge their preconceptions, maybe reassess what they want it to be. But then also people who've never even heard of the word Greenbelt, have no concept or context of what it should be. It's their Greenbelt too, right? So Greenbelt 2.0 is about deciding what we want it to be in the future. And by we, I mean everyone.
If we put communities in the driving seat of change, then what becomes possible becomes much more exciting and much more human scale. Okay. So we'd love to collect your thoughts on what did you like about or learn from these films or this project, the process, anything that came up for you. Hopefully you can access the question in Mentimeter. Maybe Jeremy, if you could put the link into the chat again. And
yeah, the link is in the chat, Maddie.
Okay. Have you put it in again just for the people that have come in recently?
Are you getting results from the Menti, Maddie?
I have on the first question. I haven't had any coming through on the second, on this question yet. So I'm hoping that people can.
They say that you haven't yet changed slides.
Ah.
In Menti. I said I click next question and it doesn't come up on me.
Right.
I don't know if it works with others.
Maddie, on my Mentimeter, I'm not actually getting any questions, so I'm just putting things in the box.
Okay.
If you have the Mentimeter presentation, you have to press present and then just go to the next slide. Whoever's logged in.
Yeah.
That will go to the next question.
Thanks. See, this is why we need collaboration with all things. I'm pressing present. And can you see, is the question coming up?
Yes, it's changed now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. And again, if that's too tricky or faffy, please just put it into the chat. Great. Can you see the responses coming up as well?
I can, yeah.
Yes, they're coming up. Is it possible to see what the what 3 words one came up with? Because that wasn't showing before.
No. Yes, I will. I think if I go backwards,
yes, you might not get forward again.
But it's all being
that
captured.
doesn't work. You can also go to view results and it would show you them.
Okay. Brilliant. So I'm going to stop there. Keep putting things in if you want to. We're going to go to our amazing panel of speakers now, and we've got 4 or 5 minutes for each of them, and they're all going to introduce themselves and just speak from their own perspective. I think I'll invite, first of all, Pete Linnell to speak, who is a planning policy advocate. And then I don't mind what order you put yourselves in. So maybe just see what flows. And maybe Ben, you might want to follow on from Pete, and so on. Just see how it comes out. So yeah, if we just, it's not much time, but just crack on 4 or 5 minutes each and then pass it on and just share the space. Thank you. Over to you, Pete.
Thank you, Maddie. Can I ask you or Jeremy to wave at me when I've got 1 minute left?
Yeah.
So I don't overrun. Thank you.
Yeah.
So no slides. If somebody could confirm you can see me.
Yeah.
And hear my voice. Thank you. Okay. So I have a document of notes from which I'm taking prompts. So I'll run through it quickly. A lot of what I wrote previously, I've deleted because it was covered by the conversations in the films and in the previous presentation slides. Lovely. So low impact development and the Greenbelt. So definitions. The term Greenbelt, as we learned earlier, comes from Octavia Hill in the mid-late Victorian period. And it's essentially protecting rural areas surrounding London, obviously, to prevent urban sprawl and unregulated development. But at that time, there was very clearly a social justice agenda. And to quote a quote that I found from Octavia Hill, there is no need of the poor of London, which more prominently forces itself on the notice of anyone working among them than that of space. How can it best be given? And what is it precisely which should be given? I think we want 4 things: places to sit in, places to play in, places to stroll in, and places to spend a day in. And I think the questions that she raises and what she's asking for is still appropriate today. So all the decades of policy and practice lead us to the NPPF as of December last year, Chapter 13, Section 150, and I quote, "Once green belts have been defined, local planning authorities should plan positively to enhance their beneficial use, such as looking for opportunities to provide access, opportunities for outdoor sport and recreation, to retain and enhance landscapes, visual amenity and biodiversity, or to improve damaged and derelict land." So that's NPPF. Those are the clear objectives of positive planning for the Greenbelt. So the question now becomes, is low impact development appropriate development for Greenbelt? So for the benefit of those who don't know, low impact development is defined by Simon Fairley, who's our principal theorist, advocate and practitioner, and behind many groundbreaking projects, notably Tinker's Bubble in Somerset, which took 30 years to obtain its final full planning permission. Simon defines LID, development which by virtue of its low or benign environmental impact may be allowed in locations where conventional development is not permitted. And he offers us 9 principles, the majority of which must be met in order for a development to qualify as low impact. And his 9 principles are that the development is temporary, is small scale, is unobtrusive, is made from predominantly local materials, protects wildlife and enhances biodiversity, consumes a low level of non-renewable resources, generates little traffic, is used for a low impact and or sustainable purpose, and is linked to a recognized positive environmental benefit. Okay, the core premise of low impact development is that people belong in the landscape, working and living sustainable lives, and the entire UK planning system seems designed to prevent this, apart from Welsh One Planet Development. brought in by the then Environment Minister Jane Davison in 2011, and the policy outline was then backed up with substantial and rigorous guidance, with a nod to James, who is in the room, for being behind that. And we now have 10 years of practice, and the One Planet Council has produced a 10-year review of the impacts of the policy, and it shows beyond question that the policy works to allow people to create genuine, sustainable homes and livelihoods in open countryside. And I suggest, for the purpose of this meeting, that a policy of this nature would be appropriate for developments in the Greenbelt. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you. Ben, should we, would you like to go next?
I can go next, or James, do you feel like you could follow on from there? Would that be appropriate? I'm happy to go, or just heard James being mentioned. I thought maybe it would flow quite well going into James.
Yeah, it's not a format I've used to where you get to pick your slot. But I'm really happy to go next. That's fine. I don't have any slides either. So
that's fine. Just introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's James Shorten. I'm a planner with 30 years experience, basically specialise in rural and more progressive stuff. As Pete referred to, I'm the main author of the Welsh One Planet Development Practice Guidance, and also did the research as an academic that led to the policy. And I've recently written the guidance for a kind of daughter policy for that, which is AL1 in Cornwall as part of their climate change DPD policies, which is again a kind of rural exception policy for highly sustainable and regenerative forms of development. Yeah, I just wanted to throw a kind of context around this. So I'm a town planner, or a town and country planner, and in that you find all you need to know about this bizarre and contrived separation of town and country in the form of my profession. We've got someone that's got they're unmuted. I think it's Lisa. Great, thank you, Lisa. And it's understandable, you know, the planning system was partly a response to urban sprawl and making space for agriculture and forestry after the Second World War. But it doesn't make sense anymore to me, because the town and the country are not separate entities, they're intimately interlinked, and a lot of research I did whilst an academic demonstrated this. People don't live their lives according to that boundary of where the settlement stops and the countryside begins. They permeate through for all sorts of reasons. So I think it's really relevant to ask whether this binary approach still works for us, particularly as Greenbelt is the most kind of solid expression of this. And we just need to remind ourselves as well that we keep building on Greenbelt. So it's not sacrosanct. It's not a hard boundary. There's obviously a flaw in it in any case. The NPPF tells us that the fundamental aim of Greenbelt is to prevent urban sprawl by keeping land permanently open. And that's the kind of root of Greenbelt policies. But there are other ways to prevent urban sprawl, and principally that's called planning. You know, this isn't the only way to stop land being developed. It's a very, very sledgehammer style of policy. But also, I think it's important to consider there's more to land than just its openness. You know, land is, whether it's open or built on, is a very, very simple way of looking at it in terms of its importance to towns, cities, countryside now, where fundamentally for me, in the land around towns and cities, we need many more things than openness. We need local food grain, we need sequestration, we need nature recovery, we need flood control, we need space for recreation. And these are partly responses to the climate and ecological emergencies, but they're also things we've known about for some time. Just maintaining openness as the primary aim of your policy does not fully address any of those issues, and nor does it address the complexity of those issues. So the point I really want to make is that Greenbelt is a very crude policy to deal with an increasingly important complexity of the relationship between town and country, and particularly what we do with land that we are reserving not to build upon. So what might Greenbelt look like in my view? I think a good starting point would be to consider maximising the benefit for urban land and undeveloped land, well, seen as a system, seen as things in relation, given that the relationship and the objectives for them exist at the same time, how do we get maximum benefit when we consider what to do with the undeveloped land? And that requires a strategy that's more complicated and more complex than just maintaining openness. And it would involve things like stacking or co-benefits. Many of the things I referred to, the food, sequestration, nature recovery, flood control, recreation, they can coexist very happily. These can be stacked, as a permaculture term, with each other.
1 minute, James.
And also built development. We already build on Greenbelt, but it's a cave-in. When you absolutely push me, then we will release Greenbelt for higher reasons, which are called very special circumstances. But should we not instead be thinking about more fruitful ways to consider the release of land? And that brings me to my final point, which is I also run a social enterprise concerning regenerative settlement, which has been flagged in the details of the session already. And what is regenerative settlement? It's basically considering how we can use development to catalyze broader landscape change, to basically catalyze nature recovery and sequestration, whilst at the same time bringing forward forms of human settlement that actually are true net zero, bring just benefits. There are no catches, there's no mitigation, and that can be achieved through a set of binding agreements. It's a model, it's not a model, rather it's a set of principles based on basically an evolution of the One Planet development work into what does this mean at settlement scale? And for people who really want to live a true One Planet life, where are the opportunities? And land-based development gives you that, because the 3 big components of your footprint are food, domestic energy, and transport. So if where you live provides much of your food, all of your energy, and you don't have to travel off-site very often, we can bring true One Planet footprints in now through different forms of development. And this could be an appropriate form of development in the Greenbelt. The social enterprise I work for is bringing forward a handbook on all the aspects of how to do this, which will hopefully be ready online in the autumn. Now, all that might sound like a really big stretch from what we currently see Greenbelt as, it's a really purposeful, active way of using that land to the benefit of both the land and also the people who live adjacent to it. But is that any more extreme or kind of crazy thinking than just keeping that land open? And that's it, which is a very, very limited response to a complex set of demands and needs. I suspect I ran over very slightly, Maddie. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you. As just to say, as questions are coming up for you, please write them down, and we'll come to questions at the end once we've heard everybody. And we'll invite you to put your hands up and ask your questions. Ben, would you like to go, or who?
I can go now, unless does anyone else feel like something flows better from following on from James? Raise your hand if so. No, okay, me. So, and I'm sharing. Am I, Maddie? I can just put something.
You should be a co-host.
Right, let me. And so if I press share screen. Okay, Google Chrome. There we go, voting. This might not work.
No, I'll start your 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. No, this isn't working for me.
I need to.
No, it's fine. I'm going to talk without slides as well. It's okay. So I'm going to go back to what Pete was talking about, or what I think he touched upon, where he was talking about what Octavia Hill was talking about in the mid-late Victorian period about the use of the Greenbelt for sitting and playing and strolling and spending a day in, because the focus of today, has been the agroecological Greenbelt, and yes, indeed, we are in a climate ecological emergency. But I also think that we're also in an emergency of nature disconnect, and you could even go from there to say that there's a sort of a spiritual emergency. You know, that our disconnection from nature is profound, and we know about children having nature deficit disorder, and the original intention of the Greenbelt was to allow for this place for leisure and recreation for city folk. And this idea of sitting in nature, to me, sounds is reminiscent of the process of sitting and meditating, and clearing our minds and being calm and at ease. And the Greenbelt, as it currently stands, doesn't really allow that. You know, what James and Pete were referring to about the openness of the Greenbelt, you know, and what I talked about in that film was, you know, the paradox of this openness is most of the Greenbelt is inaccessible for people to go to. You know, you can walk along a footpath, maybe, if you're lucky, if the landowner hasn't closed that off, if you're lucky enough to be able to get public transport to it. But for many people, the Greenbelt is inaccessible, and therefore the regenerative aspects of that landscape, of being able to have a deeper connection with nature, is actually really stymied. And when we are facing more people living in cities than in the countryside, then we have to absolutely enable people to allow access to nature for this. There's lots of work that has gone on from the University of Berkeley and others, where they talk about how, or the research is into when we are in nature, that there is the ability for us to feel awe. And with a sense of awe also comes pro-social behaviors, or otherwise known as intrinsic values, that are related to that. If we can't sit in nature and if we can't have awe, then I think there's a big aspect of us not being able to address these emergencies that we're in. And for us to feel that sense of awe and of spiritual connection is a massive thing of what we need to be doing. So although I absolutely agree with the agroecological premise of what the Greenbelt is for, I also think that there is a real role for custodianship of that landscape by family smallholders and otherwise social enterprises, projects whose mandate is for not just a social and ecological mandate, but you know, there's an awe one as well. There's a spiritual one there as well. And that they bring people, we bring people to the land. And I think that some of the situations of the planning permission that has been given recently, particularly around where I am in North Somerset, about small run family farms, those people who run those farms, and we've got Susanna here today, you know, their passion is about, yes, about food, but also about nature and also community. And I think if that there are family smallholdings who have that mandate, that they should be allowed to live on the Greenbelt, that it's an appropriate development for the Greenbelt, and that aspect of their work is to bring people from the city to allow connection with nature and to cultivate that place of awe and wonder that will help us address some of these emergencies that we're facing. And finally, I think it's also to say that we're facing an emergency of the imagination. We're lacking places to go to where we feel that there is a future that we want to be part of. And what I see of these family-run smallholdings who are agroecologically focused, that gives an imagination that people want to believe in and be part of. Thanks.
Beautiful, thank you, Ben. Ben was part of our workshop and lives in the Greenbelt, south of Bristol. Who would like to follow on from Ben? Just jump in.
Shall I go next?
Great, thank you, B.
Yes, so really inspiring session so far. Thank you, everyone. So I'm Rebecca, or B. Lawton, from Land Workers Alliance, and I run the horticulture campaign there. And it also feels relevant to mention that I've been working on planning on and off over the last 20 years, writing agricultural appraisals to help people get planning permission for low impact developments and agricultural workers' dwellings mainly. So this just all feels like it's bringing so much of my work together. I'm just going to mention briefly, I don't know if you can see this. This is our recent publication, Horticulture Across 4 Nations, which we launched at the Oxford Real Farming Conference this January. And with it, we relaunched our horticulture campaign. And a large part of that is trying to get the vegetable supply for the UK to be, to get more of what we eat and need in terms of vegetables to be produced in the UK, ideally locally or regionally. And it's about import substitution and trying to get 20% of the 2.7 billion that we currently spend on imported vegetables to be spent instead on UK grown organic and agroecological veg. And the model by which we're doing this is the food zones principles, which have been developed by growing communities in Hackney in London. And the idea is that in any urban area, 5% of the vegetables would be produced in urban gardens, 17.5% in peri-urban, and 35% in the rural hinterland. And the other 40% would come from the rest of the UK and imported from Europe mainly. So peri-urban market gardens are a really large part of this, and they have the capacity to grow really healthy food close to where it's needed, to integrate that with biodiversity and agri-biodiversity, soil health, carbon sequestration, and also public engagement. Peri-urban market gardens are really good at doing public engagement, whether this is through visits by schools, regular volunteering, courses, corporate away days. And a lot of them are also actually trying to make food available to local people who are in need, people on a low income, through things like solidarity box schemes. But these peri-urban market gardens are very labour intensive. Agroecology by definition is labour intensive. It's substituting the agrochemicals with high intensity labour. And it's quite hard to grow affordable vegetables when you're needing to cover living costs, including high rents. There are also, as we've already talked about, access to land challenges and planning, because market gardens or any land holding of under 5 hectares doesn't get permitted development rights. So not only is it hard to get planning permission for a house, but you have to go through planning channels to get permission for polytunnels, packing sheds and other development, which farms of over 5 hectares, they have this thing called permitted development rights, whereby they just have to notify the planners rather than going through the full planning policy. And in our membership engagement in Land Workers Alliance, planning and access to housing and access to land come up again and again as being barriers to our vision of having many, many more market gardens around the UK. So I've been playing with and toying with the idea in the last few months of a campaign which this is very much coming from my own thoughts rather than being official Land Workers Alliance policy at the moment. Okay, I can see, I will try and wrap it up quickly. So basically, the idea I've been playing with is that there should be a planning policy that enables organic market gardens to get planning permission for agricultural workers' dwellings and get prioritised for that because of the principle that they're internalising costs and delivering environmental and social benefits. And this would be conditional on the market gardens being certified organic, being any development being low impact development, that these market gardens were supplying a proportion of their produce at a low cost to low income households in need of fresh vegetables, and that they were providing an element of public engagement and access, so that the farm is providing access to peri-urban space. And there's actually a precedent for this in the land settlement associations of the 1930s, which I'll leave you to look up. But this was effectively enabling people to have 5-acre small holdings and a newly built cottage to enable them to start up land holdings. So I think that the time is really ripe for something like this, because the housing crisis is creating pressure to build anyway. There are really compelling arguments about needing to increase horticulture production. Back of the envelope estimates show that actually we could produce a huge amount of the vegetables we need. If 1% of peri-urban land was converted to agroecological market gardens, you could produce 73,000 tonnes or 0.4 billion pounds worth in value of production of food. And I think that a Labour government could actually be quite sympathetic to this. And I think this is something that we could really be collaborating on to build the case with academics, practitioners, and NGOs. So thank you very much. And I look forward to hearing the discussion following this.
Thank you very much, Bea. Thank you. Please, everyone, write down your questions as they come to you. We'll move along. Ted, would you like to?
Yeah, I should follow that.
Then we'll come to you.
Hi, my name is Susanna Waters, also known as Ted. I am on the Land Workers Alliance coordinating group, recently just joined that. I've been a member of the Land Workers Alliance for a long time. I run a small holding of 9 acres called Strode Valley Organics in North Somerset. It's about 10 miles south of Bristol. We're just next to Waterfall Farm, Ben's Waterfall project as well. We are an organic certified, we're one of these models basically that Bea's been talking about. James was key to helping us get our planning permission on this 3 years ago. So we've basically been through all of, for this horticultural side of things, this is what we've been through in the last 7 years or 10 years since we really bought this piece of land to get this project started. So I'll give you a little bit of history about us. We are organic certified, an intensive market garden of 1.5 acres going up to 2 acres with 4 polytunnels. We have a turnover of around 55 to 65,000 on just the veg on that acreage, which equates to about 50% of our produce, like many small market gardens, is salad and leafy greens, and that's about 50,000 items of say, you know, a bag of salad or a bunch of beetroot or something. It comes out of our 1.5 acres a year, plus then there's kilos of various other things. We employ 2 seasonal workers 6 months of the year, which equates to one person 6 months, 5 days a week. Plus ourselves, my husband Simon is full-time, and I'm about 2.5 to 3 to 5 days a week, depending on what's happening through the summer. We also do laying hens. Currently not, just had a pause due to bird flu, but we're getting another flock in this year of about 70 hens. And we've got, of the 9 acres, a lot of it's replanted with trees. We've got very wide, big hedgerows that we've let ramble and kind of escape into what would normally be pushed back and make sure field margins are very tight. So there's about 4.5 acres of regenerating woodland and river frontage, and we're in sort of countryside stewardship management schemes for some of that, but we don't get a lot of funding for that. That's really all being done because that's the way we want to manage land. So we are kind of coexisting. We're one of these spaces where we're coexisting within. We've got food production, we've got access for people, we have pre-arranged access for people to come and use the space in a variety of ways, including tours and teaching. Our planning story was really tough. So to hear of Bea's policy, ideas coming through is really exciting. And I know that since we got our planning in 2019, things have become a little bit easier for horticulture and mixed small holdings, which is great. Great to know. So we lived in a caravan and a van for 6 years with 2 small children who got bigger. In hindsight, we should have really applied for 3 years temporary planning, but that would have really given us 3 years we would have made a profit. At 5 years, we were making a living. So actually, even that bit of policy doesn't really help. We eventually got planning for a 3-bedroom flat in an existing building that we'd built about 4 years before. So I've lived in this area for about 20 years. It's very, very beautiful. It's deeply rural, actually, for part of the Greenbelt. It's a bizarre little Bermuda Triangle, we call it, between the A37 and the A38. So it's got some really lovely deep bits of nature. So it's quite easy to let that kind of come back in some ways. But what I've watched is development increase, and this idea of like that the Greenbelt policy is meant to prevent urban sprawl. That doesn't seem to be happening because the villages are expanding, the industrial estates around the villages are expanding, and they're linking up, and there's Dundry just between us and Bristol. So I'm seeing farms and buildings, old farm buildings turned into domestic, which was one of the Conservative policies in sort of 2012, 2013, and barns built literally a year before us within that policy bracket, being able to get planning and turn into 2 houses with no agricultural ties, not having to farm the land, and they're under the 12 acres, 5 hectare policy, whereas we've had to keep half of our building agricultural use, and had to jump through extensive and financially constraining hoops to get our planning. So the term agroecology includes food production with sustainable landscape. The Landworkers Alliance is really working on this at the minute. What does this term mean, and where is it being co-opted? It's not just regeneration, it's not just regen ag, it's about people as well. So, and I can really understand the hesitancy of planning officers not to let small holdings through. And I see things getting planning on very basic, what looks like small holding businesses, and then they're not being checked, and they're definitely not running with ecological within the sort of agroecological premise. So it seems like there's no sense of fairness once permission is granted, and I'm probably shooting myself in the foot here, but what I'd like to see is perhaps not more stringent sort of ties when you're actually trying to get planning, but perhaps checks and balances afterwards to prove that you're still in agriculture, because the agricultural tie is actually quite loose. Can look that up of what that actually means, but it's quite easy to just say, oh, I've been in agriculture, or I'm looking for work in agriculture, to keep agricultural ties running, or people get them removed. So there is this slow creep happening around us. And I feel like if policy could be changed towards what we've been talking about with this coexistence of nature for legitimate people who really want to, who know what it is to be managing landscapes ecologically, environmentally, and for that to be genuine land workers, genuine low impact developments, and not the sort of pulling a fast ones that are definitely happening around us. So it's this tightening of what agricultural ties means. And for my part in the story, I really fly the flag for food production near Bristol. We're very lucky to have markets near Bristol. Within Bristol, we're in what sort of an organic belt, I think, as well. So, and trying to get people out of the cities in connection with nature. However, that responsibility does come with that freedom comes with responsibility. We noticed in lockdown a lot of rubbish being left on the landscape, people using it like a public park. So there's this, how do we create a landscape where people can have access to it, but also understand how to be in it? And I think that's a big piece of education. There we go. I think that's me wrapped up.
Brilliant. Thank you, Susanna. And then just moving last but not least to Louis from CPRE. You've had a long-running important role in Greenbelt in this country. CPRE as an organisation, not Louis personally. I'll pass to you, Louis.
Thank you, Nadia. Echo what everyone's saying there. Definitely some really inspiring thoughts from everyone. So yeah, as you said, CPRE had kind of a long-running relationship with the Greenbelt and protecting it. I think what we're kind of noticing now is the idea of, it has kind of just become, from what Octavia Hill, we did a blog about this as well, kind of the origins of the Greenbelt is now, most people think of it as just this planning policy, and it's kind of been bastardized by the planning system. And it's actually now kind of a bit, I guess you could say, it's a bit kind of got the negative connotations, and so we're really about trying to reimagine the Greenbelt as a place for, you know, people, climate, and nature. So all of those positive kind of attributes that people have been speaking about, and even on a personal note, you know, I think from the films, when one of the girls said, you know, I'd like to see a bit more diversity in the Greenbelt, you know, more people of color. And I think, you know, in this country, you know, most people, I mean, me being a person of color working at CPRE and understanding as well, you know, most people of color live in the urban areas and have access, you know, and all those urban areas that we see that have Greenbelts in the country, you know, I think that'd be a good way. And I think that's something that definitely needs to be tackled and something we're looking at in our countryside for all kind of campaigning. And just on the back of that as well, what we're trying to do with reimagining the Greenbelt is acknowledge that there are the current set of Greenbelts across the country, but also that acknowledging, you know, other towns and cities that don't have Greenbelt and kind of calling them their countryside next door, and, you know, either calling the new Greenbelt to be designated around these places or not, just actually encouraging people to go and visit the countryside that they have access to in towns and cities, again, for, you know, climate, nature, social health and well-being improvements. And I think that's something that we're really passionate about, and using the Greenbelt almost with the origins of the Greenbelt and, you know, what it was there for, and identified as that kind of stepping stone to do so. And that kind of links to kind of the current work we're doing now in kind of our general election, is looking at different ways that the Greenbelt is being used. And so Graham and I, my colleague who's on this call, we're doing a report that follows on from a report that was made by Making Local Food Work called Food from the Urban Fringe, where it actually did some case studies going to local farms and community-run, community-supported agriculture, market gardens across 8 Greenbelts across the country, and understanding what was going on for those businesses doing peri-urban farming, you know, and what issues and challenges they were facing. And most of the time, you know, it was that, you know, planning was a barrier. So we're looking at actually understanding how planning and farming can be better in the Greenbelt, can actually have a better relationship, and do that from kind of the get-go. So policies that actually encourage it, and so that planning can actually identify farming as a real attribute to the Greenbelt, and not just something that I think is kind of an afterthought. So looking at, you know, encouraging local authorities to have food strategies and food policies and food partnerships, for example, like Brighton and Hove do. Waltham Forest now has a food policy thanks to kind of organically and the great work they've been doing in the North East London Greenbelt area. So yeah, it's definitely for us now kind of shifting the narrative that Greenbelt is kind of really negative, and actually trying to get back to what Octavia Hill was saying it for, and finding ways that we can do so through right now peri-urban farming and that kind of agroecological argument that I think kind of does get given a backseat, as I've said. Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Louis. Thank you to all of you for doing all you're doing in this really important kind of space, which is so important for right now. And I suppose our role in it is to kind of amplify and accelerate the good work that's already going on, and facilitate people coming together to hear diverse perspectives. Hence the conversations, the sort of creative visioning workshop that we ran last year, which is what we're hoping to do a lot more of. I'd like to invite you now to ask questions of any of the speakers, also recognizing that a lot of you have your own experience and expertise and insight into this area. So we invite you to bring that as well. Just being mindful of time and sharing the space. Thank you, Mark. Mark's got to go. Mark is the mapper that we've been working with on this whole Greenbelt project. And Yeah, so who has a question, something that they would like to bring in response to what they've heard? If you could put your digital hand up, then I'll be able to see you. Rachel, welcome.
Hello, and yeah, nice to see some familiar faces on this call. And yeah, thank you. It's been a really interesting session. Around where we are, we don't actually have very much greenbelt. I think we have like a tiny bit. But we are doing a lot of work. Like we've worked with Mark about kind of mapping potential for food growing spaces around our district. And now we're extending that work with someone from the Food Farming and Countryside Commission to see like how would the landscape near us need to change to meet kind of their vision, I guess, for agroecology. And I was really interested in tips or guidance on running those kind of imagination creative workshops that bring lots of voices into the space to reimagine, I guess, how that fringe around our urban area could look. And yeah, you obviously did that workshop, and will you be sharing kind of tips and ideas and ways of doing that?
Yes, yeah, certainly we started to kind of write a bit of a playbook afterwards, because we kind of created a bit of a sort of replicable model, or a set of kind of conditions that we felt it was important to create in order to hold that well. So things like choosing the right venue was really good, so that there's a sensory and a kind of nature connected dimension to that the space that you're in when you're having the conversation. We were very intentional about who we invited, and there were about 10 participants from quite diverse places, some from the city, some landowners in the Greenbelt, growers. There was someone from the local CPRE or regional CPRE there. So different hats. We didn't go for anything really controversial like Red Row Homes representatives or anything in the room. We had to work up to that. But there was enough difference in perspective and difference in need, difference in levels of knowledge, that it made for really sort of generative space. We sat in circle, we had a fire, we had good food to get together, so it was convivial, it was well held. We had maps, we had maps on the ground, as you saw. So there are kind of components that that I would really recommend bring together to hold it well, but we can share that information more with you, certainly. Yeah. Graham.
Yeah, hi, can people hear me? I'm speaking through Louis' mic, obviously. Really interesting, great to be here for the first time for me. I mean, I think just to pick up what Louis was saying, we've got some time this year to sort of rethink our position on this, and obviously try and develop a new policy position really, and look at the evidence drawing on case studies done before. I think that I'm trying to come at this with a very open frame of mind, and try to work out what some of the challenges and issues are. Some really interesting points have been made by people like James and so forth about the planning side, and we're definitely going to look at planning. I think the point I wanted to make is about what I hadn't thought of before is tenure and ownership. So, and I'm just wondering whether, in fact, any of the mapping work has.
Oh, you just muted yourself, or you just cut out.
Yeah. So it's tenure, because a good example would be where I live in near Colchester. We've just had all the land around there, a large part belongs to one landowner. And I'm thinking about some terrific high quality land will be wonderful for, market gardening, salad growing, vegetable growing. But actually, how do you enable landowners like that to want to release land for that kind of purposes? And I suppose the challenge is to kind of, a lot of lands gets released for development uplift. So landowners will know they can get a huge increase in value if they can go for traditional development. So there's something in this about me for what do we know about who owns land around towns in the green belts, and how might they be encouraged, persuaded, maybe it's through some form of compulsory purchase, and it might be through things like council land, to enable the kinds of development we're talking about to happen? Because at the moment, that doesn't seem a very easy proposition. But there is obviously council land, there's all kinds of possibilities. And I'm just wondering what we know about the land holding and tenure aspects of this. Sorry, there's a long way to get to that question.
Thanks, Graham. Rachel, is it a direct response to that?
It is, but it's also, I guess, there might be someone else that's better placed in the call to answer this. But I know maybe Maddie and Jeremy, you be able to answer this. But we had exactly the same question. And when we were doing the hotspots mapping with Mark, it was one of the things we couldn't access an easy data set that would find that. But then I know that the Urban Agriculture Consortium put some funding towards shared assets work on Land Explorer. And they added another layer onto the Land Explorer that actually has the boundaries and property deed records of kind of every land parcel in the land. And they used a free data set from the government called Inspire. It's a bit of a complex workaround. And I've tried to access it recently, but I haven't managed to get onto the Land Explorer to check if it's still there. I don't know, Maddie or Jeremy, if you know any more, or Kim's gone, hasn't she, from shared assets? Don't know if there's anyone else here that knows.
The Land magazine would be very interested to run an article on that database. It's something that Simon Fairley's been working on for years to try and get a map of that kind publicly available.
Great. Yeah, we can share more about that Land Explorer data set with you, Pete. James.
Yeah, I was just going to also reference Land Explorer. It's live, so that does exist. I think it still works. I also want to respond to a point that Graham made, which is, I think, partly the point he raised was also a policy problem. If you effectively have Greenbelt as a no-go area with very limited exceptions, and then you have pressure for housing, but with nothing in between, then you do get this flip-flop of potentiality of people just hanging on until one day their time may come and it gets released for housing. Whereas if we had a more nuanced approach to other beneficial things that represented the very real needs created by the proximity of countryside and built development, then there would be other policy options for land, and it could actually go forward in positive use rather than just hanging on until something changes in its favour with regard to housing. And in that way, it could actually benefit the urban areas that it is adjacent to, rather than at the moment essentially being a bit of a wasteland, a bit of a no man's land, a bit of something in suspension until something else happens.
Louis.
Yeah, that was just in response to Rachel's question on Land Explorer, formerly shared assets, and my knowledge, the land and property owner data was available through the beta version of Land Explorer. Last time I checked, we might have to double check with him or Mark. But I could also direct you to, I don't know, Digital Commons, that Kate, the former director at Shared Assets, have taken over. That's kind of housing Land Explorer now. To my knowledge, I can provide those details as well.
Yeah, we'll share the links to get to Land Explorer and who to ask about how to use it as well. B.
Yes, I was just responding to Graham's question about connecting up with landowners and the tenure, because Land Workers Alliance has been doing a little bit of work actually with shared assets as part of the new entrant support scheme, and they ran a land matching event in Bristol, and I think they're doing another one in Cornwall, Devon borders with Tamar Grow Local. But it's interesting because a lot of the landowners that came forward to the Bristol one, as I understand, were a bit further out from Bristol, whereas all the people wanting land were in Bristol and wanting land right on the outskirts of Bristol. So there was a bit of a mismatch there because the landowners who were offering land weren't offering it in quite the right place for the people who wanted land. So I think this whole Land Explorer method with the mapping and having more open knowledge about who owns which land would be really helpful. But I think also having many, many more case studies of where these things have successfully been run would be valuable, because I think a lot of landowners are a bit wary and they don't really understand. A lot of people don't really know what peri-urban farming is even. So really highlighting all the cases and the different examples of it would be helpful, and gathering examples which could be published would be really helpful. I think Graham and Louis are starting on this work anyway with their report, so that will be really helpful.
Thank you, Jeremy, then Chiara.
Yeah, hi. Just in response to everything, in response to all of this. No, I think what we've got here is the sort of the foundations of a new partnership going forward to take this work forward. And it's great that LWA and CPRE are in this discussion. And obviously we all need to find some resource to take this forward, but put that to one side. I was just thinking when I was at the Federation of City Farms, we set up and ran for several years the Community Land Advisory Service, which was basically tried to help people who were trying to access land, negotiate with landowners and trying to unlock some of the obstacles in their way. Now, as far as I know, CLAS, as we called it, is now only operational in Wales under the auspices of now Social Farms and Gardens. But I think, Graham, in response to you and what we might need to put in place to take this work forward, it might be worth rejuvenating or accessing these CLAS knowledge and putting that in the context of this framework.
Thank you. Chiara.
Thank you, Maddie. So I'm Chiara Tornaghi. I work at the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience at Coventry University, and I have been working in the past years in a large project that also included shared assets, and we have some collaboration with Maddie on conceptualizing an agroecological urbanism, and we were really looking into different examples from different countries and how horizontal development is actually encroaching farmland and threatening farmers' livelihoods. I want to say here, I feel that maybe we should have a conversation around the Greenbelt that also at the same time keeps in a reflection on the rural, because obviously we know that there is a new interest in food. So we 20 years ago or so, many people in cities have rediscovered, started to think food again. And surely after post-pandemic, there is a more broader public awareness of the importance of growing food. And in the agroecology movement, many people are actually urban-based, city-based, and they want to return to the land. And as Bea was just saying, yeah, many people want to access land from the city to have farmland. And we know the cities are gentrifying and living in cities is very difficult. At the same time, we also have a trend that is that rural lands are becoming kind of depopulated in many places. So we have rural to urban trends. Many rural contexts are not culturally stimulating enough. And actually what is really problematic is that if we look at UN Habitat and the kind of discourse that come out of those places, there is a planning of the empty, how can we empty rural lands so that the food is coming from an industrialized agricultural systems, and we are going to have to plan how cities are going to expand. So I think that having in mind also what happens, how difficult it is for people to actually stay in rural context because of some of the same dynamics we have in the UK land ownership. It's very difficult to establish businesses in those contexts. We have difficult accessing markets. So I think that if you don't want to risk that the Greenbelt is the land to go to for everything, for recreation and for food growing and for people who want to access some green and for development, we really need to think also what happens outside and how people can more broadly, as an urbanizing society, have places that are livable. Yeah, so maybe, I don't know, I understand it can be quite difficult to articulate here. We can have, it's more easy to think what is the green belt and where does it end. But there are, maybe from what it was said before, there are people who actually come up, they are not necessarily all in a peri-urban. So maybe we can have this productive conversation into what the rural can also look like in terms of being a place where we produce food and not just go off for second homes.
Yeah, thank you. We'll share. We'll also share a link to the agroecological urbanism work.
I can put it in the chat. Yeah,
with everybody. It's a brilliant body of work. And yeah, and thinking about those the global forces that that move capital and goods around the world from one place to another, and so on. And these are the sort of systemic things that need addressing, and they're very entrenched. I was going to say something else. I can't remember what it was. Pete, I'll go to you. And anyone else we haven't heard from as well? We'd love to hear your
just a quick follow on from what Chiara was just saying. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Professor Patsy Healy, who's now in her 80s and an emeritus professor, but historically she was lead in the TCPA and a pioneering woman academic and professional. She introduced me through one of her books to agripolitanism, which is the idea that you can have all of the cultural and communications advantages of city life whilst having a distributed food and agricultural materials production system. As a planning idea, largely out of favour most places now, but I really think it's worth having another look at that. Has been applied in practice in some parts of Southeast Asia, the Malay Peninsula, Burma. So essentially the idea, you can have city life in a rural area as long as you're able to travel sustainably.
Thank you, Pete. Kioris has posted that Patsy passed away last week.
Yeah, there will be probably a ceremony or public event to remember her contribution to planning after the funerals.
I was just going to pick up on something that Pete, you mentioned earlier in the chat about targeting institutional landowners as well, when in response to what Graham said about how do we, so much of Greenbelt land and rural land is privately owned. And in fact, in the 40s and 50s, I was reading interestingly about how preservation and conservation of the countryside was conflated with private ownership as the way to achieve conservation and preservation. So that link was made at the time that the NPPF Greenbelt policy came in. And so the historical nature of Greenbelt as also as commons, as a common access public good, kind of didn't appear in those 5 purposes of the Greenbelt as stated in the NPPF. It sort of seems to have kind of evolved to recognise more the kind of well-being and recreational elements since then. But I think that was really, really interesting, seeing as Greenbelt is, some argue, the most popular and popularly defended planning policy that there ever has been, defended by the people because of its impact on giving breathing space to people working in industrial cities and so on. Been very heavily defended by the people. So what is this relationship to the ordinary person? And what we've seen is this sort of continued enclosure through this conflation of conservation with private ownership and so on. So coming back into ideas around collective ownership and community land trusts and council farms, and how do we create mechanisms to hold the land for these kind of common good purposes in perpetuity, rather than just a council farm being, you know, somebody's future, you know, lovely house in the countryside if you've got enough money, etc. So coming really, what can the public sector do to protect for these sort of multifunctional landscapes, generative landscapes, and for the people, but also what can the people do, and what are these other more democratic mechanisms such as land trusts and so on. This is a kind of interest that I have in removing things out of the firing line of the speculative markets for good. It's a really critical question. I wonder if, yeah, Graham, and also just inviting anyone who hasn't spoken yet, please come in, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Graham, and then B.
Graham, you're on mute. You're on mute, Graham.
It's clearly had the mute on using his microphone. Sorry about that. No, yeah, Maddie, you mentioned council farms. They've done quite a lot of work on council farms. And I think that's a really important way to go. I think the challenge will be, as we know, that local authorities are really strapped for money, and the kind of vision we had for influencing what might happen with investment in council farms was sort of lost in changeover of Secretary of States in the current government. So we might need for a change of government for something to happen in that space. But I think having a clear sense of public land would be really important. But I think I'm also interested in what other policy there might be. So I think just keeping open the idea that thinking about how the kind of money that is being invested in environmental land management, it's another area of my work, could be directed towards areas around towns. So obviously Bee's mentioned this with the 5 hectare threshold, which is going to be lifted on environmental land management. So there will be an opportunity there. But I think a bigger issue is how that money can be managed and its spend be directed by people locally. So there's some agency of local populations to get what they might want from areas around towns through something that invested money, and there needs to be some kind of governance framework for that, I think. So that's another area we're sort of looking into as a policy set. And I think I had a question, really. It might be to the planners, but in terms of opportunity, I mean, I did a lot of work on local food in the past, and I suppose my thoughts are, what markets are there available to drive the kind of development of new small market gardens and supply into towns to provide a market? Because a lot of farmers are not getting much money for their produce, and that's a huge issue in the mainstream farming system, if I can call it that. So do we need, does part of the policy set have to be local authorities rethinking food retail and tying into those opportunities, or can it fly without that? I think that's quite a challenge when we're losing, I think still losing independent retailers. We have no green grocers left where I live in Colchester anymore, traditional green grocers selling to wholesale. So is it retail that has to be rethought as well as part of a policy package?
B, go ahead.
Yes, really interesting what Graham's saying. This wasn't why I put my hand up, but actually the whole issue of markets is so key. And actually it does seem to be a bit of a problem. And when we were running the Peri-Urban Practitioners Forum as part of Fringe Farming, that really came up as a problem for a lot of the peri-urban growers accessing those urban markets. So I think we really need to be working on that. But actually, I was responding to what you were saying, Maddie, about different ways of holding land for public access, for the public good. And I think in America, I was reading quite a few years ago now about community land trusts. And one of the real driving forces behind community land trusts in America is prevention of development. And then agricultural uses have kind of come on the back of that. So the land is bought to protect it from housing development, but then this land is sitting there and it's owned as a community land trust, and then that's created opportunities for farms. So it might well be worth us looking at those kind of examples, or looking to those kind of examples in America. I mean, obviously they've got a lot more space than we have, but I think there could be some really valuable lessons to be learnt.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, I had a couple of points. I mean, the first one is a kind of, it might intersect or not, but the NPPF revisions in this National Planning Policy Framework, so the national set of planning policies, were revised in December and introduced a favour towards community-led development. Now that's very new and is going to be expanded in further revisions, but it did have a particular rural focus. It was also particularly focused on housing, but not exclusively. So there's something there about bringing forward the importance of community-led stuff, and that may be relevant to this discourse. The second thing I wanted to respond to is Graham's point, which is we work for a lot of horticultural growers. They are, in terms of land area, the most productive and profitable forms of agriculture that exist. And generally, a good horticulturalist, and Ted may correct me here, will not have problems finding a market because of the quality of their produce, but it's not entirely retail. It's a very diverse set of markets they will seek out. I live in Totnes, and we've got 5 significant horticultural growers around the town, including Riverford, and they're all thriving because there's a thing here called cluster marketing, where you get a kind of change in the food culture which occurs. But also it does bring forth this idea that I was referring to in terms of regenerative settlement, of planning for whole land use systems. And if we're planning for a renaissance in horticulture, we could also be planning for how that will be received in terms of markets, in terms of creating neighborhoods that are linked to those horticultural enterprises. There's a kind of crude version of that called agri-hoods in the States. There's a much more sophisticated way to do it if you think about extending the One Planet or the AL1 policy in Cornwall to basically creating communities that have their own market gardens, and creating those strong links between them, because you will also, in doing so, really drive down the emissions of that community at the same time, because food is a third of our carbon footprint. So it's more purposeful, it's more complicated planning for those who want to try and achieve a different outcome. Because if you want to live a really low impact life in the UK, it's hard. The infrastructure to make it work doesn't exist, and we could begin to create it so those who wish to do that have somewhere to go and effectively become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. That's a lot of the work that I'm involved in. Thank you, Maddie.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to Ben and Ted, and then I'll kind of come back to me for just for the last 10 minutes, just to focus our minds on where we go next.
Thanks, Maddie. Following on from B about the land trust model, I know that I'm a member of the Ecological Land Co-op, who have strong links with the Ecological Land Trust, and they were highly averse to investing in land in the Greenbelt because of the restrictions in place on Greenbelt planning. So, you know, there has been some appetite in the community, and because of the systemic barriers in place. But you know, that approach of holding land in trust and making it available to agroecological workers, it should work, shouldn't it? It should be able to work out here. And there is funding, there are investors who are interested in putting the money into that to enable those futures to be held, those livelihoods, and addressing all those issues that we've been talking about. There's something else which has sort of appeared in my mind as well. I'm aware of the huge amount of land that's being turned into woodlands now as well, which, you know, I think there's quite a broad church of it, you know, from carbon investment of nasty monocultures to some really progressive approaches. But I know that, for instance, Avonmead's trees have got hold of a huge amount of land. They've had 100 acres so far, and then they've just bought another 420 acres. You know, that's 500 acres that they're going to be planting out to woodland. Now, that's not the same. That's a different tack from the food growing approach. But if we're talking about fuel and fiber and building materials, and going back to what I was talking about enabling access to nature, enabling generations to have deep time in nature, then these woodlands are a really good approach for it. And I don't think there's going to be a letting up of appetite and interest in buying land and converting it to woodlands. And I think there should be a really good approach to working with some of those organisations. Like I said, Avonmead's Trees, there's another organisation called Regenerate Earth, and I think they hold the land in trust. You know, there's got conversations to be had with them about saying, you know, can there be provision of housing for woodland workers there, again with that strong social mandate. It's all, to me, it's all about changing the story and having a different imaginary opportunity for people as well. You know, that's when I speak to people who come and visit here, they're always inspired by what Ted is doing, what I'm doing here on the land. You know, and we really need those different stories as soon as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, Ted, just briefly.
Yeah, so the cost, the one of the massive accesses to the Greenbelt, I think, is obviously the cost of land, driven up by equine and developers and the sort of commuter money, and the profitability per acre. The horticulture is absolutely prime agriculture for Greenbelt. It is, you know, like I said earlier, we've got an amazing turnover off a very small acreage. It's really hard work to do, obviously. But I had a lot of agents when I was looking for land originally, really sucking their teeth and going, you know, that's in Greenbelt, you won't get planning there. And it took me being particularly steely and determined to push through that, to the detriment of my health in the long term. I know a lot of other people have had this problem with getting planning, particularly in Greenbelt areas. So there's also the perception that it's impossible, despite it being, you know, a prime, you know, prime place. Although the land, the actual grade of land isn't always ideal, particularly this side of Bristol, and in the north side of Bristol, the Blue Finger is. But the efficiencies of being able to get produce, fresh produce, quickly into Bristol. We have very minimal refrigeration. We do all our deliveries pretty much on the day it's picked or the next day. And the efficiency of that flow of produce and that flow of fresh food is just so, it's so obvious to me. And you don't have to, you know, even if land is quite poor, we're actually on grade 2, something called hardened mudstone, which sounds hideous to work and is. So we're actually we've created no dig systems, which is obviously much more sort of prevalent these days. So I just kind of, again, flying that flag for the kind of the easy flow of ability, if we can create market gardens and small holdings where the flow into Bristol, into cities, into towns is that sort of access is flowed. There is also, like you say, on the flip side of this market idea, and we as growers out here with lots of little market gardens popping up, there's occasional kind of like, oh, there's another one. How's that going to affect our markets? How's our promotion? How's our stability? And so there's a real key, which is what the Landworkers Alliance is, you know, really key working with, is this collaboration idea that yes, market gardens, brilliant, but not so that everybody just comes in and undercuts each other, because sometimes there's a stop and start, or sort of 2 steps back, 1 step forward with the markets of who's actually going to buy the produce that you're producing. And we don't want to overlap, and we don't want to undercut each other, and we want to be able to get the right value for produce that's needed, and then be able to pass it on, you know, pass on to lower costs as well. So I'm really, really up for that, kind of driving that market side of it, the understandings of how, for people to know what could be available for them at what, you know, and that's affordable prices, so that can work hand in hand.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks. In our last 10 minutes, I just want to kind of bring in a couple of kind of political dimensions One is a correspondence that I've had with the shadow secretary cabinet person in planning and housing. I asked him about the Greenbelt and what their current thinking is. And I'm going to read out his response. And then I just wanted to flag up that we've had very recently a very productive conversation with Bath and North East Somerset, obviously because we made this film in the Greenbelt that surrounds Bath, and they were really excited about the film and the process that we undertook as a council and its potential for helping them to fulfill the pledges in their manifesto around land-based livelihoods and agroecology around Bath. They've got these things in the manifesto, which we also helped them write, and they're wondering how to bring those things about. So we've had really good conversations with Bath and North East Somerset leadership, who have essentially said, we want you to bring in some people who can handhold us through writing some innovative policy about the Greenbelt that we have jurisdiction over around Bath, in Bath and North East Somerset. And so there's an openness there. There's a recognition that what we're talking about here in this room is really important, both for rural and urban people and futures, and that this council, who have a bit of a history of being up for pioneering things, particularly around food, want to take it to the next level. So I'm hoping that that would also be the same for North Somerset, for Oxfordshire, for Leeds, any other councils, Cambridge, and we can run these processes, these creative conversations in the Greenbelt with people, with the voices that need to be in those conversations, bridging these divides and welcoming a diversity of views so that we can get a much more inclusive and more nuanced conversation going, where we can bring in these solutions and these ideas and these inspirations from elsewhere, and we can explore them and elevate and amplify voices that are currently excluded from these conversations about the Greenbelt. So I'm just going to read what Matthew Pennycook MP has said, just because I think you find it useful to know. So he says, in general terms, we want to return to a strategic system of Greenbelt release as operated prior to 2010. We believe there should be an expectation that Greenbelt land is regularly reviewed as part of the local plan-making process and as part of a reintroduced tier of strategic planning at sub-regional level. We will seek to overhaul national planning policy so that we better protect, enhance, and make more accessible high-quality Greenbelt land for the benefit of the public, while also more effectively facilitating development on low-quality land within Greenbelts in areas where it is most needed. Most importantly, we will take steps to ensure that when Greenbelt land is released, it better meets the needs of local communities through the introduction of a series of golden rules that Greenbelt development must adhere to, including minimum levels of affordable housing, adequate infrastructure and amenities, and sufficient access to green space. So that was his, in a nutshell, summary of where they're at. And so there's something around what should these golden rules be? And he seems to be advocating for, locally determined interpretation of Greenbelt policy. And it might be that in Baines, we could develop some supplementary planning guidance that speaks a lot more strongly to all the things we've been talking about today. So I would like to invite you, just as a last flourish of creativity, to type into the chat, where do we go next with this conversation? This wasn't a Mentimeter, but I'm going to skip that. And so what possibilities can you see in your own context for this work to go forward? Whose voices do we need in these Greenbelt conversations? What are the next steps? Who should be involved? That kind of thing, so that we know where you would like this to go. And in particular, thinking about these community conversations like the one in the film as a means to having a very strong foundation to these sort of policy developments. In the chat or in the Menti, if you can access that, but I don't know if you can. I'm not sure how to move the slides on properly and smoothly, Jeremy. So I don't want to be faffing in the last couple of minutes.
I think in the Mentimeter there isn't a new question, but we can use the chat maybe.
Yeah, use the chat.
I think, also just feel free to email Maddie or myself directly after the meeting, because obviously there's so much to cover here and so many great ideas that are sort of symbiotic. Maddie and I, just so you're aware what we're doing, we do not have any further funding to take this work forward, but as always, we're very optimistic, eternally optimistic, despite the evidence that some money will arrive from somewhere, and we will be using the synthesis of this ping to actually help inform the bid that we are going to be submitting. But if anybody else would like to take the lead in submitting a bid in which we're partners, that is equally, that would be of equal interest to us.
Thanks, Louis. Thank you very much. Yeah, how would these Greenbelt workshops be if we did them with school children? Yeah, please do email Rachel. Please ponder on it, and we'll share. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, thank you. It was really good. I'll go now, but yeah, I'll email.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah. So we'll keep it open, keep typing. But for those of you who need to go, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and all your work and being part of this this session. And we very much would love to keep weaving it all together. And we'll be in touch about our funding ideas. And if you'd like to collaborate on that. I've been in touch with some of you already about helping Bath and North East Somerset. So there's a few strands to take forward. Thanks, James. Lovely. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, thank you for initiating it. That was a really good session.
Good. Good.
The record is still on. Shall I turn it off now?
Yeah.
I need to...
Well remembered. I've